documented so everyone understands that we're not targeting the 15-pound window. We're all accepting of a 6-pound window, for example.
Do you find in that commissioning process the owner is involved in it thoroughly throughout the project, or only at the end, or only as making sure it's...
For the MEP systems, I find that the owners are very engaged. They're more familiar with the process, and typically they've had some experience with the MEP systems. The building enclosure, I think we all can appreciate, is a fairly complex system. I mean, it's not just one component and it's not just one machine that we might be able to tweak a little bit and kind of vary its frequency or adjust its pressure to balance it. You've got 10 minimum subcontractors working on one building enclosure, and it's all got to perform harmoniously in order to function properly. So I find that the owners have less of an understanding of the complexity of the building enclosure than what they do other systems. Yeah. So they tend to not follow it as closely, simply because it's not just they're in their wheelhouse of experience. But I think that's changing. That's definitely changing as owners are becoming more experienced. Like once you've had one failure, you're tuned in to the building enclosure. That only has to happen once, that you get a call in the middle of the night that the roof is leaking or the windows repeatedly leak, or you got mold growing in the wall assembly. That only happens once before you start to really, focus attention on the building enclosure. So yeah, it's changing. I think everyone's focus is changing. It's a greater awareness of energy efficiency. Air barriers are in the code now as well. External insulation is in the code requirements now. So it's requiring a different way that we're building. So everyone has to begin to refocus their efforts on understanding this new dynamic of how we're building enclosures.
One question though, the owner, if the owner would decide to change his OPR for the less desirable window or any-type fenestration product, that doesn't necessarily mean that the architect or the other members of the party have to go on board with the fact that the owner's chosen. It's the owner's decision that he chose that.
It is the owner's decision.
The architect's not obligated to change his specification.
That is correct.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And the architect would write a letter basically saying, Mr. Owner, it's your choice to proceed with this window system. You have a blessing or good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Keep our number on file for later.
And keep it on file, exactly, yeah.
And really the architect or the general contractor or the specialty contractor do the same thing. Hey, this is not performing like you wanted to. You might want to look at it from our perspective as well.
Yeah, it's not unheard of for, let's say, an air barrier contractor to write a letter to the GC saying, we understand this window is not performing properly, future issues may not be associated with the air barrier, it could likely be associated with
particularly if your design would actually marry into the fenestration product, and if they've chosen a product that's below standard, then your air barrier is integrating with that window system. So.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, because normally when they do the commissioning testing, they test the window and they call and they say, hey, we just want to let you know you got a leak. Yeah, I'm sure you do. Go ahead, keep on testing, because 80–90% of the time it's the window anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't lose sleep like I used to.
Alrighty, so understanding the process a little more. So we begin with the pre-design phase, which is a really critical phase mostly for the owner, because this is where they get to outlay and define all of their expectations for the project. So whether it's like, I've used X brand roof before and I'm really comfortable with that roof and it's on the rest of my schools, or it's on the rest of my buildings on this institution, this is the type of roof I want to use. Right the way through just generically saying, well, I have a language of precast, I want my barrier to perform or I want my precast panels to be part of the design language. That might also, if you've got more of a engaged and understanding owner, they might say, I want 2 lines of defense, for example. You know, I don't just want to rely on a barrier design in any instance. I want 2 lines of defense. I want, for example, where my precast is, I want to have an outer line of sealant, and I want my other backup inner line of sealant to be my long-standing air seal. So, so the OPR can be developed by an owner itself if you've got that level of depth on your staff, or you can come and get some help from the building enclosure provider to assist in developing the OPR. Now, the OPR is usually done as some kind of a workshop. It's the stakeholders of the building, of the owners, getting together and essentially putting down on paper what they want out of this new facility, or what they want out of the existing renovation. So what I've done here is pretty much outline what the tasks are associated with the commissioning process, and highlighting kind of where it plays in and what's important to you as an architect or as an owner throughout this process. So as an architect, too often I've had the experience where architects are not developing programs. They're not writing briefs like they used to. For example, this project, a large project, is just about to be completed. We got involved with it about 4 years ago, and I approached the architect for their program. They had been involved with the design for over 2 years, and they came back to me and said, well, you know, what do you mean the program? We have 2 years worth of meeting minutes, and it's this thick, and that's how we've developed our program. And so you kind of politely step back about 5 paces and say, okay, well, you know, didn't mean to be offensive here, but a program is essentially what you would expect as an owner of you know, essentially a building of that size and importance. What is the owner getting? What is the architect, how are they meeting what the owner wants? Whether it's an enclosure all the way down to interior finishes. So the owners are not getting programs, which is essentially where the owner's project requirements is beginning to step in. So you may say that that is actually stepping on the toes a little bit of the architect, and unfortunately I have to actually recognize that it is. If the architect has a program, then it's going to marry and mesh quite nicely with the OPR. If the architect has not developed a comprehensive program, the OPR is really what the owner has as their document. And it can be a pretty useful document for the architect, because it essentially is going to give them a real step up in defining exactly the direction of the design. So so that's how we look at the OPR can be a benefit, and the pre-design phase can be a real benefit to the architect. A review of the basis of design is required for commissioning. The basis of design is intended to be the technical equivalent of the OPR. So how is the architect going to meet the performance objectives and the owner's project requirements? So this is more of a technical document, this is more of the layman's document. Building enclosure commissioning plan essentially will articulate what exactly the next 1 year or whatever that commissioning process is going to outline. It's going to include such things as who the team is, what the roles and responsibilities of the team are, and essentially each step of the way, which is kind of like what we're going to outline this evening. Budget, and critical to the commissioning process is documentation. So every step of the way, we're going to document exactly what we're talking about. Yeah.
Speaking of the OPR, do y'all look into who kind of drove the language and details into that OPR? Say you've got an owner who's not real savvy with building, maybe it's their first building to build. The architect's going to kind of drive that OPR, because the owner's not going to really know what they want. And since there's none of them in here, we all know that they're going to pound a round peg into a square hole because they want it to look that way. And we're left with the problem on how to solve that mystery. But I mean, is that something you look at when you're reviewing that OPR, you know, was it even realistic in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, ideally the OPR, yeah, is either going to be written by the owner themselves, or they're going to have the commissioning authority write that. Now, ideally, as the commissioning authority, you're in early enough. Now, too often that doesn't happen. Again, it's changing as there's more knowledge of the requirements of the commissioning coming into play. But typically, we're finding, you know, we're in a little bit into the design phase, and that the horse has left the barn a little bit. The architect could write the program, but the architect might help the owner write the OPR, but not specifically. It shouldn't come from the architect, no. Again, it gets back to kind of a third-party, independent commissioning authority added to the process. So it shouldn't be the architect. It should be an independent body with helping the owner specifically achieve their goals.
Is there any good way to sniff that out from a general contractor standpoint or a specialty contractor standpoint when we're looking at bidding a project?
Well, when you get the documents for a project, you should be getting a building enclosure spec, and I'll talk a bit about this a little bit here shortly. And you should have an awareness of who the commissioning authority is on your project, yeah, through that spec, or you know that scope is included, because it does. I will fully recognize commissioning impacts the architect's scope, it impacts the contractor's scope, and it subsequently impacts the sub-scope. So we are adding another layer of oversight to the project, and it does cost. And it does cost the people that are already involved in the process. Hopefully, over the long term, all those costs outweigh, you know, are beneficial, but it is an outlay, yes. So moving into the design phase, from the owner's perspective, this really is an opportunity where you've got an extra set of eyes looking at the documents. So, normal process, the architect develops the construction documents and specifications. Throughout that development, whether it's a simple building, there may be just one review. More complex buildings, you may have 2, 3, or even 4 reviews at the various DD, kind of 50%, 95%, those kind of standard completion dates. You'll be developing a list of the issues that you're concerned, and you're forever back-checking against your original list of issues to verify that those have been addressed during the subsequent design iterations. So the types of things are fairly standard that you're looking for in your design review. You're looking to control the path of air, water, and thermal. And these are the 3 critical factors really affecting building performance. Other aspects that may be included in the commissioning process is your control of light, or so is solar shading or daylighting, how noise is transferred, and potentially the structural integrity of some of the enclosure components. But ultimately, from an owner's perspective, you're looking to ensure that it's durable. So the materials, the systems are all durable, they have a proven performance, that the owner can maintain the building. And that's super critical as well. Many architects don't actually think about how those owners are going to maintain their building for the next 20, 50, 100 years. And be responsible, and by that I mean be green if you want to call it green, be sustainable, etc. But just be aware of exactly the types of materials and aspect and requirements that each of them need. Yes.
Are you going to go into examples where you have the design phase and the construction phase overlap?
Design build process?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Not specifically, no. It does change the commissioning process just a little bit, but essentially the phases still remain and the process remains. What you're doing is you're including a whole lot more interface, you know, kind of like the bridging document phase. So there's more meetings, there's more collaboration, there's a faster track. It's the same process, it's just kind of on steroids.
on one of the projects I've worked on in the past, I never really formally knew who the commissioning authority was, but I'm pretty sure now it might have been a testing lab. Is that a common practice for a testing lab to do the building envelope commissioning?
Commissioning really is this comprehensive process. You can break it down, and unfortunately the MEP commissioning process has been kind of watered down, if you will, to the point where a lot of people think of it as only testing. And so subsequently that mindset got transferred over to the building enclosure. But essentially, no. In order to fully commission the building, you must go through all of these phases. And the first thing you've got to have is an OPR, because that is essentially, it's an owner's process. You know, I'm not doing it for myself, you're not doing it for you. This is all about the owner and understanding what they want and achieving those objectives. So unless the owner has the OPR at the front end, all the way through the training at the back end, you haven't done the process. All you've done is test the building.
Yeah, what I saw is it looked like that the commissioning was subbed out to a testing lab, and it's like, okay, just keep those guys happy, and that's where we need to be.
But there's very few projects around that I know of that has a commissioning system. I can only think of one in my time that I've had a commissioning, somewhat of a commissioning system.
I saw a great spec on a job, and I know now what it was supposed to mean, but it's not how it was carried out or executed. It was just...
Because I was thinking, in the last 5 years, we've done mock-ups, and we've never built the project to that mock-up, never. Because the mock-up failed, and sometimes went 3 times. And Dan and I worked on a job once where the architect designed this flashing detail, and flashing was too thick, and,
yeah,
and it couldn't hold the corners. It couldn't hold the in corners and that corner, so we had to go back and they had to come up with a different product, a different design before we could build this up there. And it took months.
But you were grateful you did a mock-up.
Yeah. And tested.
Well, I don't know, the mock-up and the building kind of went together at the same time.
That happens too.
We did finish the mock-up before the building, though, which was good.
Yeah. But we found a lot of problems.
Yep.
And I think the thing that, some of the problems is that the materials have changed, in my opinion, have changed so much in the last couple of years,
Yes.
that the architects have had a hard time keeping up with the product. And some salesman comes and says, this is a great product, and they slap it in, and
It doesn't work.
it doesn't work.
Absolutely. I can only agree.
Wow.
You know, that's true, Mike. I mean, the complexity of building enclosures has really changed and increased in the last few years. Yeah.
So what, you know, we get a project and we've got a set of documents and they have a building envelope commissioning spec. We can go to that architect and that owner and say, we need to see your OPR. If they cannot produce an OPR, then do we have any liability in actually performing that commission?
Yes.
I mean,
It becomes part of the project manual. So essentially, yes. I mean, you're still kind
You're
of
contractually obligated to perform to that specification that's not correct. It's just like putting in a window that leaks and trying to make it not leak.
oh, be item number 1.
But you'd be asking, you know, what's the foundation of your
Right, I
commissioning
mean, how do they,
process?
again, it's,
I think owners are trying to grasp this too.
Absolutely.
And like Fiona said, you have owners that are that want to do the right thing, and they put that in their spec, and then people say, well, yeah, we'll do that just like we did the MEP systems, which have been watered down. So I think we're probably collectively in this room the best ones to say, hey, why don't we do this correctly? Ask the questions up front. Who is the OPR, and how is this whole system going to go together?
Yeah, I have a link at the back of the presentation. I've actually formed kind of a collaborative with some like-minded folks in the industry to get free information out there. And one of the documents is how to write an RFP, and it's got a sample RFP for commissioning authority. So the owners can go there, get that document, and it's going to outline, okay, what are the typical types of things I should be writing in my RFP? Because, you know, I've seen too many RFPs where it's just adapted from a commissioning, from an MEP commissioning authority, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with building enclosure. And the two, even though the process is similar or the same, it's not really undertaken in the same manner. So we're trying, but yeah, it's really, because it's all in its infancy, we're all learning, and everybody's trying to grab a little piece of the market and figure out how can I make money.
A side question, would you be willing to give us your presentation? Could you send it to Dan and he could email it out to the guys that showed up?
No problem.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's move on a little bit. So the architects, you know, I look at this as an opportunity to get a little more input on your design review. And the general contractors, hopefully this is an opportunity where any of the kind of issues that you subsequently might be writing copious RFIs about can actually be addressed during the design phase, so you can move forward, get some really good tight numbers from your subs versus having something that's a little, you know, much wider spread that is a little harder to really get your arms around. So the design phase, as a commissioning authority, a provider, I'm getting used to that term. We are in the process of transitioning to the word provider. It's coming about through certifications, and the authority having jurisdiction is concerned that the use of the word authority as building enclosure commissioning authority or commissioning authority is going to confuse the industry more than what's already confused about. So we are going to probably use the word provider here moving forward. And it used to be agent, that got dropped for legal reasons. Now we're using authority, that's going to get dropped for other reasons. So just provider is the new word. So we've done our design review. Hopefully we've got all of the kind of kinks worked out in the details. As a commissioning provider, you would now put together a building enclosure commissioning spec. So it's going to identify the roles, responsibilities of the parties involved. It's going to go through a whole kind of criteria about, you know, well, if you need to do a little bit out of sequence work, you've got to do that. So all kinds of things like that that really pertain to efficiently ensuring that we're going to build this and test this thing up front and early versus all the way down the road, which is one of the interesting challenges and differences between mechanical commissioning and building enclosure is that our building enclosure testing is done as soon as we get something completed. We don't wait until the end of the project. Our systems are already installed. So what I like to do here is in part 3 of the commissioning spec is to include basically a matrix or a table that's project specific. And commissioning is all about being project specific. Don't just grab your spec that you did last time or your set of shop drawings that you did last time and submit it. It's really about, this has to be project specific. So it's going to include per your standard ASTM tests, maybe it's ARMOR, maybe it's factory mutual, etc. And it's going to establish what you're testing for, so perhaps air leakage, water leakage, roof testing, waterproofing testing. And it's going to articulate where the tests are going to occur. It's not going to tell you exactly because, you know, we want to have some element of surprise. What we're testing to, what the description of the test is, so that if you don't know exactly what an ARMOR E11 or 5 is, it's going to tell you in layman's terms, okay, we're going to put your window system under a differential pressure, and we're going to spray it with water, and we're going to test it for air if we do a 783. It's going to tell you exactly how many number of tests and the sequence, or so the schedule of testing. So we're going to do it 10%, 50%, 75% completion of that particular system. So that helps the general contractor implement that into their schedule, so they know exactly what to expect. Yeah.
What percentage do you find most commonly used? On like window testing as an example, what do you?
It depends on the size of the building and the complexity of the windows. So if we've got a little box building, we might be comfortable with a couple of tests. You also have to kind of evaluate, if you fail, evaluate things as you go, because you never actually know, okay, the quality of the subcontractor, or are they subbing out the sealant on their windows? Does that sealant guy really know where he's supposed to put that sealant on that window system? So you've got to feel your way through things a little bit, and this is a good foundation. It also will articulate, just as a point, if you fail one, how many additional tests you need to perform in order to ensure, give the owner a level of comfort that the system is actually performing properly. So I can't specifically answer your question, kind of like it depends.
Do you normally have that in your program before an RFP or whatever goes out, so everybody knows what to expect?
You mean to the contractor and
Yeah.
subcontractors?
Right.
Yeah, so this specification would be included in the project manual, yeah. So they know exactly, oh gosh, I want a commissioning job, Let me put 20% on my number.
I've always seen it shows up later in the job when it's time to test, nobody knows what percentage to test to, so.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to avoid here, is ensuring that all of that information is upfront so that everyone's aware of the process moving forward and it's not a surprise. So the general contractor can plan and the subs can plan as well. So yeah, the general contractor can begin to put this into their schedule. They can understand, all right, perhaps I need a 21-day cure on my sealant, so as soon as the guys install the sealant, that means 3 weeks later I can do my test. And how many windows am I putting in during that time frame am I potentially at risk of? So those are the kinds of things that we're hoping that this can help with by clearly articulating these tests in this separate specification. So this supplements the architects. I don't take all of the part 3 out of the architect's specifications, but this, I look at that, I say, all right, well, this is a tricky building, and they've got one test, for a curtain wall, and it's going to be, 3 column bays wide, or an X number of floors tall. Well, for a flat curtain wall, that might be great, but our building does this and this and this. So maybe we want to have smaller units and we want to be testing more frequently. So we really have to design our test program to the design of the building. We don't just take it off the shelf. It's not a cookie cutter, one-size-fits-all type of process. And we do that for each of the systems. Now we will be looking here shortly at ways in which we can test or we commission various systems. And this is being driven by ASHRAE 90.1, where they've now required air barriers as part of their code, as part of that requirement. So we're going to be looking at focusing on how do we commission an air barrier exclusive of the rest of the whole building.